Good afternoon, everyone and members of the public. We are here today. It is 2:04 and we are starting the regularly scheduled meeting of the Advisory Technical Committee of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order, and can we get a roll call, please?
Bolinas Fire District.
Bolinas is here. Steve Marcotte.
Thank you. City of Larkspur, I'm sorry.
Here.
Kentfield Fire. Nevada
Here.
Fire District. I'm sorry, is Kentfield here?
Kentfield's here.
Thank you.
Thank
Technical
you.
difficulties.
Nevada Fire District.
Here.
Stinson Beach Fire.
Here.
Town of Ross.
Present.
Thank you. City of Mill Valley. County of Marin Fire.
Jordan Reeser is here.
Marinwood CSD. Marinwood. Sleepy Hollow Fire. Corte Madera.
Down at Corte Madera, Todd Lando here.
Thank you. Town of San Anselmo. City of San Rafael.
Here.
Inverness Fire. Muir Beach CSD.
Here.
Southern Marin Fire. Town of Fairfax. That gives us 10. That makes a quorum. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Lori. And then can we also get a roll call
Yes.
for our non-voting members at large?
Yes. California State Parks.
Bree Hardcastle's here.
Thank you, Bree. National Park Service.
Good afternoon, Greg Jones is on.
Thank you. Marin County Parks.
Hi, Jim Chaka here from Marin County Parks.
Thanks, Jim. Pacific Gas and Electric. Marin Water. And ESP.
Bill Cole is present.
Okay, thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. If we can have, we're moving on to item number 4, which is the executive officer's report.
Or do we,
Well,
hi,
actually, you know what?
number
Is-
5.
This would be,
Mark, you're on.
actually, it would be item number 3. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? Sorry, everyone, I'm starting to jump ahead. Any adjustments to the items from anyone? Seeing none. I believe this is also before the executive officer's report is an opportunity for members of the public who are present, who would like to go ahead and comment on any items that are not on the agenda, are free to do so. Please be advised that if you can please be respectful and turn off your cell phones, and we are free to open it up to members of the public. Lori, do we have anyone?
Is there anyone at this time wishing to speak to the board regarding any items not on the agenda? Please raise your hand. And I apologize, I just saw that it's not on the agenda. So I missed that for some reason. My apologies. I see no hands raised.
Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the committee. Thank you, Lori. And then that puts us back in line to item number 4. You're up, Mark.
And I'm going to pass it off to Ann.
Yeah, I think the agenda needs to be put back to it's the I don't know, standard ATC agenda for a planning and program manager report. But I'll go ahead and play the part of Mark for the moment. So first, I want to let you know about some of the staffing plans we have. So as you know, we still only have 2 permanent staff members with the MWPA plus 2 Grizzly Corps fellows, and we've been really grateful for their help. And we have Lori, who is also helping out with admin, but 3 out of 5 of those positions I just mentioned are temporary. And so we would like to hire some folks to help out. We have a recruitment going on right now for management analyst, and that is help with clerking, board agenda prep, a wide variety of administrative duties. And that is listed right now, and the deadline is tonight to apply. So if you know anyone, please do pass along that information. We will also be recruiting for our first vegetation management specialist position, and that is specifically for the chipper program. That recruitment will start today or this week today for that position. So that's exciting as well. We're going to be using that list as an eligibility list for future positions also. So please do pass that information along. We would love to get some great candidates for future positions also. We'll also start recruiting for a grants specialist position probably in April. We need to modify that position. We were originally thinking about making that a contract position, but due to Assembly Bill 5 and some updated labor codes along those lines, we needed to make that position a part-time position rather than contract. So we're modifying that. It'll go back to the board, and then we're hoping to start recruiting very soon, probably in April. And then I'd also like to share my screen here. And oh, Lori, can you allow me to share my screen, please?
You're okay now?
I think so. Let's find out. Yeah, great. So hopefully you can see this slide. I'd also like to provide a little bit of an update regarding we're thinking so much about the next work plan. We're also spending a lot of time still implementing projects within the current work plan. We've got 2 projects going to the board this week, tomorrow, and that includes 2 vegetation management projects, one that overlaps Marin County Parks and Open Space Land, and another in San Rafael in the city near the around San Rafael Hill. And so that makes a total of 18 projects that have gone through environmental review for core projects for the fiscal 21-22 work plan. So, and I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. So I'm going to show you a slide from that, and also pick on Ruben and Todd to see if they'd like to add any points about that as well. So before I move on to the next slide, I just want to mention the next ATC meeting is April 6th at 10 a.m. So as you know, and Todd mentioned this, I think at our last meeting, that we were going to have a public meeting to discuss the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. We were pretty excited about it. We're excited about this project. We sent out 1,700 postcards to members of the public. We also sent out a couple of hundred emails to members of the public and members of various committees. We really wanted to get that word out far and wide. We had about 70, 75 members of the public attend beyond ourselves, those of us who were presenting, and really felt like it went well. The format was about the first hour of presentation to the larger group, including an overview of the project, a reminder that, you know, shaded fuel breaks are only one piece of the puzzle, that we're also pursuing home hardening, defensible space, evacuation and alert planning, things like that. And those are all really critical to an overall strategy, kind of a systems approach to doing this kind of fire risk reduction work and making our communities more resilient to fire. So this shaded fuel break, as you know, is 38 miles long, and the width will vary from one location to another according to conditions on the ground, but we're covering under CEQA about 300 feet. We had a lot of great questions in that main presentation that were put in chat. And then we ushered everyone into breakout rooms. So we had 3 different breakout rooms where folks could ask their questions by raising their hand, and it was more of a dialogue. One breakout room was geared towards different vegetation treatments that would happen on the ground and asking about that. Another one, breakout room number 2, was mapping and modeling and kind of the science behind the work. And then number 3 was more aligned with the Cal VTP program and the environmental compliance around that. So we covered, potential sensitive species, and then the process for tiering a document off the California Vegetation Treatment Program EIR, and addressed a lot of questions around that. So we felt like it was a really good format. We were very happy with how it worked out. And I would love to show you our project page on our website. I'm going to have to navigate to it really quickly. Hold on one moment. Because we are using that project page as a place to provide the public with more information about the project. And I'm going to show you how to get to that page. Great. So hopefully you can see our website. And you can get to the project page in a number of ways. You can scroll down and see, I thought our news article was going to be on the front page. So you can get to the project page in 2 different ways from here. You can go to projects, reduce flammable vegetation, or you can go by zone and go to Central Marin. And then you click on Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. And then you've got all this information here. You've got a great image that Todd provided showing before and after treatment as an example in another location. And then all of the slides that we used, the videos from all of the breakout rooms, every moment is up there, and it's all on YouTube. These links are active. There's an email address for any questions or requests to receive further notifications for public meetings. And then we also have a KMZ file that can be downloaded so that you can open it up in Google Earth and you can check out where the project is in relation to your neighborhood. We'll also be adding other information like a phone number to call with additional questions because we're starting to get calls for this project. And we think that project page is going to be a really great tool for getting the word out for this and future projects. So that's it for my report. I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm happy to also let Ruben, Todd, and anybody else weigh in on that public meeting.
And real quick, the link for the news page is top left of the website. You'll just see news next to the web portal.
Thank you so much. I missed that.
Todd, do you have anything to add?
Oh, thank you, Ann. I think that's a great rundown of the meeting. I feel like it was absolutely a successful meeting. The attendance was good, if not great, but it's tough to, we know from experience, it's tough to draw many more than 75 residents from Marin into any kind of public meeting. So I think the reactions that we received in the meeting were spot on with what we expected. It gave us opportunities to discuss some of the controversial topics with people who I think had real concerns. And at least judging by the response in the Independent Journal article 2 days later, I feel like we were successful in providing information that quelled some of those concerns. So overall, it was great. I think for the other zones that are considering similar projects in the future, we've learned a lot of lessons. I think we're all happy to be sort of the guinea pigs here in the central zone. I know we could sit down with groups that are planning similar fuel breaks in the future and help streamline the process and make the next one work even smoother.
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you, Todd.
No, thank you, Ann. Once again, just to ditto what, or to echo what everybody said, it was a good presentation. If you hadn't had an opportunity to look at it, definitely recommend taking a look at the video on the website, MWPA's website, and at least kind of give you the flavor of the presentation and some of the questions that were being asked. Okay,
I think Belle has a question.
Belle?
Yeah, no, I don't have a question. I have a comment. I wanted to say that Anne has been very accommodating in talking to any number of us in the environmental community about the presentation and about the fuel break. And there were quite a few good comments made, and I think these will be brought into the conversation and addressed by the committees. And so we're appreciative of the opportunity to be able to continue to provide input on that very interesting and large project. Thank you.
Thanks, Belle. Any other comments or questions from the members of the group? Seeing none, I think we moving on to item number 5 on the consent calendar. Currently, the only thing on the consent calendar is approval of the
Excuse me.
minutes. Yes.
We do have a hand raised for that last from the public.
A comment.
Yeah, I'm not
Yes.
sure. Do we open it up to comments for the executive report? Members of the public?
Historically, we have, it's just,
Yeah.
we don't have to, I mean, we may or may not respond, but we historically.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, so
so
we'll go ahead and open up to members of the audience or the public who would like to either comment on the report that was given by our program manager.
okay, there's a hand raised with the last 4 digits of a phone number is 1459. You have permission to speak. Go ahead. Take your mute off, please, and 1459 phone number, are you there? Your hand is raised. Well, let's move on. I guess I don't hear anything from them.
Okay, we'll come back to them if they answer up here in the near future.
Yeah, and star
Okay.
6 can unmute from the phone.
Okay, we will continue. We'll bring it back to the committee. Back to item number 5 on the consent calendar. Item A is approval of the minutes of the February 24th ATC committee's meeting. May I have a motion, please? Motion
Larry,
by Larry Passero, second by Lynn Osgood. Can I have a roll call, please?
if you'd all unmute your mics now, then it'll be faster to go through. Bolinas Fire District absent. City of Larkspur,
Here, yes.
Paintfield Fire,
Yes.
Novato Fire,
Yes.
Stimson Beach Fire.
Yes.
I'm going through the wrong one here. Town of Ross,
Yes.
City of Mill Valley, absent. County of Marin Fire,
Yes.
Marin Wood CSD, Sleepy Hollow Fire, Town of Corte Madera,
Yes.
Town of San Anselmo, City of San Rafael,
Yes.
Inverness is vacant, Marin Beach CSD,
Muir Beach, yes.
I'm in Muir Beach, I'm sorry. Southern Marin Fire is absent, and Town of Fairfax is absent. Thank you. Passes by unanimous vote of those attending.
Thank you, Lori. Continuing to item number 6, informational items. We have nothing on the agenda. So we'll move on to item number 7, which is discussion items. So 7A is the CEQA frequently asked questions. Do we have a report?
Yes, we do. So you may remember last month, it was requested that we discuss CEQA with the full ATC. And it just so happened that we had just done the same with the board. And so we're bringing Sabrina Teller, our CEQA attorney, back to join us at the ATC level. And she's going to go through a few slides here with some of the questions that have come up, either at the board level or with stakeholders or with various member agencies. And I'm going to share my screen here, and Sabrina's going to take over.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Anne. So Anne and I had put this, as she mentioned, this presentation together for the board in response to some questions that we had gotten several times from various different members. And so we thought it would be helpful to give you essentially the same presentation. So hopefully it's not duplicative if you've already seen the board's presentation, but at the end too, I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys might have about the MWPA CEQA compliance for all of the projects we've done so far and what's coming up. So the topics that kept coming up are with some understandable confusion about the MWPA's role as a responsible agency and how it fulfills that role under CEQA. That leads us into what qualifies as substantial evidence under CEQA and what role that plays in our environmental analysis. And then we were going to cover sort of what the most common pathways to environmental CEQA compliance that MWPA has been following and what we think is likely to come along in the future. So CEQA designates, these are defined terms under CEQA. Typically, most people understand the concept of a lead agency. That's the agency that is actually approving and implementing the project and has sort of the most primary level of responsibility over shaping a project and implementing it. But another important role that agencies play are responsible agencies, which is defined in CEQA, and that is an agency which has some authority or jurisdiction over a component of a project or some aspect of the permitting. And therefore, they also have an obligation under CEQA to consider in their own permitting or approval decisions what the environmental impacts are and how they could be avoided or mitigated. So this is an independent duty from that of the lead agency. And so when MWPA is acting most often in its role as a funding source for the lead agencies that propose these core projects and others and come to MWPA for funding, when it makes that funding decision, MWPA is acting in its role with its responsible agency hat on. And so it has to, according to the CEQA statute and the implementing guidelines, has to independently comply with CEQA by considering the analysis that the lead agency has done and its choices for compliance, but reach its own independent conclusions about whether and how to approve the project involved and whether and how it agrees with the environmental analysis that's been prepared by the lead agency, usually first. So if so in the CEQA guidelines section 15096, which spells out the process for a responsible agency, the responsible agency has to assess that lead agency's documentation and make its own determination about whether that is sufficient for the responsible agency's compliance. And if it does not think that it is sufficient, then it must prepare its own supplemental analysis before making its approval. And so in that role, a responsible agency is sort of equally liable, if you will, under CEQA, potentially to litigation. If a project opponent were to challenge a project for which a lead agency has made an approval, but a responsible agency like MWPA has made a funding decision, they might very well sue both agencies. And both agencies' compliance would be part of an administrative record and would be assessed for adequacy by the court. So that's why that's important. It's because the agency is also liable, like a lead agency is, in a reviewing court action. Next slide. So that leads us to how does a responsible agency comply with CEQA on its own, or what standard is it held to? And typically that is what we call the substantial evidence standard. The term substantial evidence is defined in CEQA as facts, reasonable assumptions predicated on facts, and expert opinion supported by facts. It's not, as the statute lays out, mere argument or opinion or narrative, stuff that's clearly wrong, or information regarding social or economic impacts that are not directly tied to environmental impacts. And so the reason that we focus so much on substantial evidence is that every compliance determination, choice of environmental review document, conclusions about levels of significance of impacts, et cetera, have to be supported by substantial evidence in a record. And so what that typically takes the form of is the kind of extensive analysis that MWPA has prepared for most projects to date, going through the various components of the criteria of the claimed exemptions that MWPA has been often using, and demonstrating with sort of lengthy narrative and explanation and often some technical studies how each of those criteria are met and how the potential exceptions to exemptions are not triggered by a particular project. And so that has been the focus of these analyses that have been prepared by Anne and the MWPA's outside consultants, is to build a defensible record supported by ample substantial evidence for each and every discretionary funding decision that MWPA has been making in its role as a responsible agency. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we've been doing this about a year now for these various projects that have been approved to date. We have, or the staff have made a conscious effort, I think, to focus first on what we would term the low-hanging fruit, the projects that are easier to decide to approve and to implement, or projects where there's the greatest need. And those have happened to fall into a couple of the different classes of exemption from CEQA. CEQA, most people understand or have heard of EIRs and negative declarations, but there's also a lengthy list of what the Natural Resources Agency has come up with, that it's called categorical exemptions. These are categories or classes of actions or activities that normally are assumed not to have a significant impact on the environment. Some of them have very specific criteria, others are more broadly stated. We have determined that most of the projects for activities like defensible space, work in open space in the WUI, to defend and help build defensible space for existing structures, evacuate, clearing, et cetera. Most of these types of activities fall under the class 4 exemption for minor alterations to land. And there is a specific example provided in that exemption for defensible space clearing from either 30 or 100 feet from structures. So that's the one that's been most commonly used by the agency. Another one that is sometimes applicable to some of the types of projects is one for existing facilities. So that covers things like repairs and maintenance and sort of the ongoing function of various types of existing facilities and structures. And then a third one that applies to some types of projects is for small habitat restoration projects that are on 5 acres or less. And under that class 33 exemption, the focus is on restoring, for example, removing non-native vegetation in order to allow native vegetation to flourish or thrive, to improve various markers of habitat. It wouldn't be appropriate for all types of projects, but certainly where the focus is on improving habitat, and with the come along benefits of fire fuel reduction, that class 33 exemption is appropriate. If there is not an exemption that applies because of either the size of the project or the types of impacts it has, then another pathway would be to prepare an initial study, which, depending on the conclusions about the significance of the impacts explored in that initial study, would either lead to a negative declaration saying there are no significant impacts, or perhaps a mitigated negative declaration in which all of the impacts can be mitigated by the adoption and incorporation into the project of mitigation measures under CEQA. In rare instances, there might be also the need to do a standalone environmental impact report. I think the size of the project that would trigger that kind of requirement might be quite large, and so I don't know if the MWPA is contemplating any of those currently. There is also a fourth pathway, because the State Board of Forestry and Fire Protection has adopted the California Vegetation Treatment Program, EIR, which covers the increased vegetation treatment in the state responsibility areas all over the state. That adopted program EIR is available for what we call tiering under CEQA, where implementing agencies like MWPA or other of the local lead agencies can look at that analysis, compare the types of activities and the locations that they propose to do those activities to the scope of coverage in the Cal VTP program EIR, and follow what's called the project-specific analysis checklist that was adopted with that program EIR, and make various determinations after some technical studies about whether the project could be determined to be within the scope of that prior program EIR, in which case no further environmental documentation is necessary, or if there are, say, parts of the project area that are not within the SRA, but are of similar enough type to the types of projects that were studied, or close enough in geographic location to the types of projects that were studied in the Cal VTP, then some additional analysis could be done, perhaps in the form of an addendum to that program EIR. And then MWPA and or the lead agency could make their approvals, file a notice of determination memorializing that approval, and proceed to implement the project. Another important point I want to note with the documentation for categorical exemptions is the need to consider the list of potential exceptions to those exemptions. You first would determine that the project meets the criteria of the exemption, but then also you would consider whether there is evidence of cumulative impacts or impacts to historical resources, or unusual circumstances surrounding a particular project or the circumstances under which it's undertaken that might, notwithstanding the presumption that the class is exempt, might still have environmental effects. And so again, that's part of the reason why the exemption analyses for the projects approved to date have been quite lengthy, because of the need to consider not only the criteria of the exemption, but also whether any of the potential exceptions apply. So that is our CEQA pathways in a nutshell. I know that's a lot of information to throw at you in a short period of time, but so I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about that process or the projects approved to date.
Thanks so much, Sabrina.
Jordan, do you have a question?
Well, I just was curious, Sabrina, and a lot of terminology. When you're going back to your original slide, as far as the substantial involvement, or what MWPA is considered in many of these projects because of the funding, what's that called?
The responsible agency classification.
So yeah, I guess I'm just thinking that through and just want to make sure, from a responsible agency, that definition, for example, myself and all of staff that work with me and around me, working on these projects, time, money, etc., have a significant involvement with these projects, and I would consider them a substantial involvement. And just curious if that, because we're not going through a separate compliance process, even to acknowledge, the validity of the compliance that MWPA is doing, does that open all the other responsible agencies and lead agencies up as well? Just because we're not a funding agency, we're definitely providing funds, staffing, and other things associated, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The line that you might draw between responsible agency or not responsible agency isn't always super clear, but it does, I think, need to rise to the level of a discretionary decision of some kind is being made by an agency's decision-making body. And so if that assistance is in the form of, staff and technical input and advice, but there's not a public official decision being made to allocate funds the way that MWPA is doing, every month with its board, I would say probably that these local, sort of less or more behind the scenes involvement probably does not rise to the level of, triggering a responsible agency's role. And certainly I think to the extent that those agencies have concerns or, trying to figure out what level of involvement triggers their own compliance with the responsible agency procedures, those other agencies may look to the analysis done by MWPA and or the lead agency and make a determination for their own part that what has been analyzed and presented so far is adequate for their purpose. So if there were a concern or if there was some sort of more official action that needed to be taken, by those assisting agencies, they could make a determination that the analysis prepared by either the lead agency or the responsible agency or both is sufficient for their purposes.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I had a fairly similar, I think I'm kind of along the same lines with Jordan. So I understand the MWPA is a responsible entity. I guess my question is the lead component, and can the review be the same for the responsible and the lead? And then maybe is the actual land ownership come into play when you're deciding lead, responsible, or any other party involved?
Yeah, that's a good question. It can get a little complicated to figure out who is, the lead agency and who's then in the responsible agency role. And CEQA gives a little bit of guidance in defining each of those roles and then what to do in the event of a dispute about who's the lead. Generally, the lead is the agency with the most level of control over the project, either because they have the most approvals to make. More often it's because they have the largest scope of authority to shape the project. So if it's on, say, city controlled land or, an open space district's land, they generally are the ones with the most authority to decide where and how that project gets implemented. And therefore, the purpose is we don't analyze things under CEQA just for the sake of generating paper. It's to consider whether there are changes that might be made in the project or how it's implemented or when it's implemented or the footprint of it that could be responsive to any environmental concerns that arise in the course of investigating it. So if an agency doesn't have the authority to say, don't do it here, do it over here, or do it at this time of year, or do it with these restrictions, then they don't really have a lot of discretion over the project, and therefore they wouldn't have as large of a CEQA role. So generally the lead agency is the one with the most authority or jurisdiction over a project, or as the statute provides, it's the one that will act first. So sometimes it's a timing issue, but sometimes it's the level of control. There occasionally the dispute over who should be lead agency and who's properly a responsible agency. Sometimes that will get litigated by project opponents who would note that, well, you picked the wrong lead agency, and because you picked the wrong lead agency, they didn't mitigate as well as they should have, and therefore, the whole environmental process is tainted. Those kinds of arguments are kind of far and few between. There aren't that many cases where somebody has successfully challenged the designation of a lead agency versus a responsible agency. So generally, if agencies have a good faith reason for picking themselves as the lead agency versus the responsible agency, and they have a coherent rationale for making that division, generally a reviewing court is going to be deferential to that decision. Don't know if I've helped or more confused you.
Belle?
Yeah, my question is, when do you get involved? Does an agency come to you to ask for assistance or advice on whether this is applicable to them? Is there a process by which this takes place, or do you just issue the final rules?
Well, I'm just providing advice to the MWPA. I'm on retainer to the MWPA for just ongoing CEQA advice. So I'm not issuing any rulings or anything like that. Generally, I think that the role of lead agencies and responsible agencies is fairly well defined or understood in that each of these agencies, say, let's use City of San Rafael as an example. They're proposing to do work in a defensible space, in defensible space beyond existing structures, and they've provided a list of those projects to MWPA for funding in the current work plan cycle. And so it's known as a proposed project by the lead agency, the city in this instance, and then the MWPA is acting in its role as responsible agency when it makes the decision to fund that project. And so City of San Rafael would have a role, to determine for its own part in proposing and approving the project, what pathway to compliance under CEQA is appropriate. And then MWPA is making its own determination. Usually they are in agreement about the pathway to compliance, but occasionally they could reach different conclusions.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the committee? I think I may have one, Sabrina, and I don't know if it's more of a question or more of maybe some clarity, just the way I understand it. Most of our projects that we're proposing, especially like this Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, most of that runs across public lands. For example, county open spaces, which is one of our partners. Just so I get the understanding of the lead agency, I think I have an understanding of the responsible agency as the MWPA. However, as a lead agency, because most of the project or work will actually be done on open space lands, the way you described it would make it seem as open space would be the lead agency because they have the most control over what occurs on their lands. And the funding and the project management would then, in collaboration with open space, would come from the local central agencies.
That's my understanding of how those roles have been interpreted, in the year or so that we've been doing this so far. I mean, Anne might be able to chime in too on this, but I think there are several recent examples where open space district is the lead, and MWPA staff and the consultants have been working in consultation with the open space district as they're designing the project and as they're explaining to MWPA exactly what they want funding for. So it is, they're not usually making these decisions in silos. There's usually some close collaboration going on to make sure that both agencies are generally in agreement with how it should be carried out and when and under what conditions, et cetera.
Thank you. Any other questions from the group? Seeing none, Lori, can we open it up to the public? I believe there's one hand up.
Yes, there is. Phone number ending in 1459. I will allow you to talk. If you press *6, it will unmute you. There you go. Thank you.
Hi, this is John Hanley from Sleepy Hollow. I've been on the whole time. The question I have for the CEQA, if you have a 5-acre say if you have a 10-acre parcel, but you can reduce it to 5, would that come into compliance, removing non-native plants? You said in the CEQA, is that up to 5 acres or can it go beyond 5 acres?
The criteria stated in the class 33 exemption, which is the one for habitat restoration, is limited to projects of 5 acres. Now, recently there is case law interpreting another size limit in a different categorical exemption to the work area as the project rather than going by the parcel. So if you have a 10-acre parcel, but you're only doing work on 5 acres of it, then I think there's an argument that the project footprint is 5 acres or less, and therefore potentially it would qualify for that exemption.
Okay, then the next question would be, what do you do as an entity that if you don't, for instance, a nonprofit, you don't feel you're getting a fair shake from the city or that you're currently where the entity resides? For some reason, they shine you on for looking for a better. How does one make a complaint or to go to the next level? If you feel your entity clearly needs work, but they're not getting a fair shake by the local agency. Am I making myself clear?
Well, I think we're getting into area of legal advice that I probably shouldn't stray too far into. Okay. But certainly contacting your elected officials is generally a good next step.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I can just add John Hanley is an ATC member representing Sleepy Hollow. So welcome, John. I'm glad you could make it. And then we have Luke Fretwell joining us as well. He is with Marin CSD. So thank you to you both for joining us.
Thanks, John and Luke. And then just Lori, for the record, Steve Marcotte's here representing Bolinas.
Steve Marcotte.
Just so we can have him for the record for any kind of decisions or movements that we make moving forward with the meeting. Do we have any more comments or questions from members of the public?
Is there anybody that would like to speak on the CEQA item in the public? Please raise your hand. I see none at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to the committee. And one last time, I'd like to open it up back to the committee for any discussion items regarding the CEQA presentation that was given by Ms. Teller. Seeing none, thank you, Sabrina. It was definitely informative. As you can see, CEQA is not within our realm of influence and our expertise. So we definitely rely on the subject matter experts on that side of it. And anytime anyone says CEQA, the hair on the back of my neck stands up just because it's the lack of understanding.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but now after this last 15 minutes, you're all honorary CEQA nerds. So
Well, thank you. Much appreciated.
Take care. Thanks.
Okay, moving on to item number B in discussion items is a work plan, development budget update, and subcommittee reports on the JPA wide. And do we have a report on this?
We do. Can everyone see this PowerPoint slide?
Yeah.
Yes. No? Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. So I'm going to give you a bit of an update on where we are in terms of projected revenue for next year and some updates regarding the JPA-wide projects that have been proposed. And we'll also rope in Charlotte Jourdain, who's going to help present on some of the development along the line of grant program ideas for next year. So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we've seen the consumer price index rise by 5.2% in the last year in the San Francisco Bay Area. The MWPA has a cap of a 3% inflation adjustment. We chose not to use that inflation adjustment last year, but we are proposing to use it this year. And Mark met with the Finance Committee recently, who supports a 3% inflation adjustment. So that will increase our revenue under Measure C by 3%. The board will be considering that option in April. That means in terms of potential revenue and kind of big buckets of funding for the MWPA, that gives us about 20.5 million in terms of total projected revenue. Core budget would be a little over 12 million. 10% of that is 1.2 million for administrative costs. When you deduct administrative costs from core, then you have 11 million left over for projects. For local, which is 20% of total revenue, that's about 4.1 million. DSpace plus abatement is also 4.1 million, also 20% of the total. And then within DSpace, 2% of that goes towards abatement, unless we decide to do something differently. And then in addition to those items, I wanted to go into some of the discussions around projects for JPA or proposals that would be JPA wide. I won't go into too much detail because you've heard a bit of an update previously, but I do want to list out some of them. And this slide is certainly do as I say, not as I do in terms of PowerPoint rules. Apologies for all the text. We'll move on to the next slide, which is a little easier to read. So the ad hoc subcommittee that worked on JPA-wide proposals brainstormed and shared a lot of ideas. Some of them are listed here, and I have another slide that includes several more. One of the ideas that we discussed and we talked about previously as a full ATC was environmental compliance for core projects, the funding going into kind of a one bucket, so we have a little bit more leeway for environmental compliance funding those projects that have implementation budgets that normally, so previously we would take a project, 10% of that project budget would be set aside for environmental compliance. And then anytime you went over that 10%, you'd need to take away from the implementation budget for that project. And that means going back and forth with the board items, agendas, some delays there. As we know, we've picked off some of the low-hanging fruit, the roadside vegetation management type projects with lower environmental compliance costs. The larger shaded fuel break type projects will probably be more expensive than roadside vegetation management. And so we'd like a bit more flexibility in terms of how we use that environmental compliance funding towards which projects so that we're not constantly trying to adjust budgets and go to the board. That helps us with some of the more complex projects that are coming up. The second item is, trying to tackle the coastal zone, particularly in terms of environmental compliance in the Coastal Act. It gets pretty sticky and pretty expensive. So we'd like to explore the idea of taking some of these project ideas for the next several years and addressing the environmental compliance kind of as a package. And we're hoping to find some efficiencies there. We think that some of that work has a JPA-wide benefit. So we're exploring the idea of a JPA-wide including that as a JPA-wide proposal. The third item here is risk reduction tracking. So looking at ways to measure our success in terms of fire risk reduction after our projects are implemented. So some of the roadside vegetation management, how much does that actually reduce risk? Can we quantify that and use that towards our metrics? Fire detection camera coordination. Mark has been working on this in terms of coordinating with PG&E, working on data management for the fire cameras and all that data that comes in. And what do we do with it? How can we use that? Evacuation risk assessment. This is still a bit of a question mark in terms of cost. We've reduced cost by a lot by negotiating with the consultants and various entities who responded to our RFP. We also have potential grant money for this project from the Coastal Conservancy that could help. So stay tuned there. We're hoping to hear back from the Coastal Conservancy soon. An ongoing expense is Zone Haven, our subscription there. We're thinking $80,000 for this next fiscal year. Public education, the proposals for this next year will include some video shorts, some workshops, additional written materials, support for Firewise communities, some bilingual outreach, the ADAPT campaign, Ember Stomp Festival, and other things, and hoping to hear from others in more detail later on today. Attitudes and knowledge survey. This is something that we're looking at to help measure how much all of this outreach actually moves the needle. Does this increase education awareness in the public? So we're exploring that as well. We have some positions that are ongoing that are kind of rolling over from the last fiscal year. So this includes the position with Marin Master Gardeners that works towards education and working with homeowners on defensible space. We also have a disaster preparedness coordinator, which was part of last year's work plan and would roll over into this year's work plan as well. Defensible space inspection app, the fireside work will continue, so that's included as well. Grant programs and staff to support. So part-time grant specialists to help give away money to residents so that they can do home hardening and defensible space. And we'll hear more about that in a moment. Direct assistance and some staff to help with that program. We're exploring the idea of getting beyond the reimbursement and really addressing need for low-income residents. And we've been working with various folks on that, and you'll hear more about that in a moment. And the CHIPPR program and staff to support that. also a really important program. And I've invited Stephen Peters to talk a little bit about that later on today. So the second ad hoc subcommittee really focused on the grant program and ideas to expand that to more residents, to and expand in multiple different ways, including the award amounts. And Charlotte Jourdain is going to join us to talk a little bit about that right now. So Charlotte, would you like to share your screen, or would you like me to do that?
Yes, good afternoon. I can share my screen.
Okay.
Got the presentation ready here. So can you all see this? Thank you for your time, and thank you to the ad hoc ATC committee that provided a lot of input on to what can be done next year with the grants program. So as you know, this year's program was started mid-December, so we'll have about a half a year of good information, and we're trying to improve upon our current experience, but we're also relying heavily on the experience of Novato, San Rafael, and other jurisdictions that have managed and implemented various grant programs over the year to give us some input here. So an overview of what we're thinking about, and I think Anne just already went over this. So a resident grant, a direct assistance program where work gets done without the resident needing to pay for it upfront and then seek reimbursement. A community grants program, which is similar to this year, where people get the work done and then submit their receipts and photos and justification, and we reimburse. And then an agency abatement program for high-risk parcels as determined by local agencies that could be control, sort of like freeing all sorts of administrative hurdles there, and really giving an opportunity for agencies to solve the most pressing and urgent needs. And then a little bit needs to go towards outreach and promotion to let our residents know about the existence of the grant, and build a dashboard and some technical improvements to help us manage and over time design better programs as we learn what works and what doesn't work, what people are applying for, and what they're sort of leaving aside, even though it's on their report that they need to tackle that, and so on. So I'll continue, and feel free to interrupt me at any time. The resident direct assistance program, the idea there is to contract with a trained crew to perform selected defensible space and home hardening work on previously inspected parcel with the permission of the eligible residents. So like I mentioned, this program aims to remove the barrier, the cash flow issue that might arise for some who need to pay up front to get resolution and mitigation on their parcel. We think we can work with crews such as the Fire Foundry, the Ecology Corps, the North Bay Conservation Corps, and so on. And we're hoping to create long-term relationships that will help us minimize the need for shifting back and forth, and really have a crew that's trained and efficient in the nature of the work that we're asking them to do over time. This is aimed at, as I said, low-income resident, including seniors with an MWPA tax exemption on file. So we already have about 2,000 to 3,000 parcels that already qualify for this program right off the bat. The type of work that the ad hoc committee is considering for this would be things such as vent removal of dead vegetation, cypress, juniper, and bamboos, installation of gutter guards, a mix of home hardening and defensible space items that are sort of the highest and the most clear-cut needs that can be found on upon inspection. If we schedule, so just to give you, I'll go over the budget at the end, but just to give you an idea, if we schedule 100 days of work, we think based on experience in San Rafael and some others, that would get us to address these issues on anywhere between 400 and 600 parcels. And as Anne mentioned, this would require the addition of an FTE to help us, to help MWPA manage the crew scheduling, screen the residents for eligibility, and manage the program altogether. The second arm of our grants program next year is very similar to current year program. Resident receives an inspection and then chooses from the list of discoveries, select which items they'd like to resolve or to address, and then apply by submitting a request for reimbursement with receipts, photos, and so on. I want to insist on the fact that this is all based on inspection related work. So we're not accepting any application that does not have an inspection on file. And these inspections, with the integration of the FIRASAT inspection system and our new grants platform, really helps us see exactly we have the before photos taken by the inspector and the after photos submitted by the residents. So we have a good idea of what's going on that parcel. We know what's left to do on that parcel after our grant work goes to help the resident, and so on. We think because of this requirement that all parcels be inspected prior to applying, we could actually open the program to all residents, to nonprofits, and to businesses by setting the award limit per parcel. HOAs also. So we don't think that there's a need to require any sort of AFN or access and functional needs or other eligibility requirements for the individuals next year like we do this year. And this is because when we're granting funds to a parcel to resolve their issues, we're really helping the whole community around. We're not granting a private benefit to that resident. So it makes sense to open it to anyone. We do think that we want to increase the home hardening award maximum to match what's currently available under the Novato grant program. That's $5,000 per parcel. Again, it's all based on inspection and on documented needs. And then I think the D-space maximum per parcel would stay at about $1,000, same as current. The last arm of our grant program would be the agency abatement I described earlier. So that's essentially member agencies identifying very high risk parcels for the community that require a comprehensive approach and really freeing up the ability for agencies to act and submitting reimbursement to MWPA. So the idea there is that there's no pre-application, pre-request, anything like that. It's simply a budget limit by zone. But we'll see here, I'll go over the budget now. I think the amount of funds available for this program is based on, what else is available. So the ATC has a choice to scale down by removing any one of these three arms that were proposed, or you can choose to, keep all three of them and scale back or scale up in the funds that are available for any one of these three components. So just to go over it real quick here, the resident direct assistance program, as I mentioned, 100 days of work would get us to a total of about $765,000. The community grants program, if we calculate the maximum award, not all parcels will get the maximum, but if we base on the maximum award with $3 million set aside, we could get to 500 parcels or so. So, and then there's a little bit of admin fees that are necessary there. And then we have some money that's needed for outreach and technical improvement, the dashboard, et cetera. So we're about $3,845,000 plus any funds that you decide to set aside for the agency abatement program. That could be that 82 or 83,000 and some, or depending on what the wishes are here. So I know this money would be set aside from the core. So I'll leave it up to Mark and Anne if they'd like to add anything, and of course I'll answer any questions.
Nothing for me to add, Charlotte. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Any questions for Charlotte or Anne regarding the report? I can't see anyone up here. Let's see.
Chief Martin, I've got,
Okay,
so I
there you
guess
go.
maybe it's just more of a clarification question of what we want to accomplish today. Like, do you want to like thumbs up kind of the JPA wide budget and like the chart Charlotte just showed? Or is this just kind
the
of
recommendation is to receive an update and provide any feedback to staff of the direction where they're going with the program.
do you have, I'm trying to do this math, but if you've already done it, that'd be awesome. Like if everything that just got approved as JPA wide was like thumbs up and got approved by the board, what's left that would be proportioned out to the agencies based on the populations?
And just to clarify, we don't have to take any actions today. We don't have to approve these. We can continue to provide input and work on the numbers. These are not final proposals.
Do you happen to have a rough estimate? Just to kind of, I think what Quinn's getting at is if all these programs are approved, which are all great programs to begin with, and that gets taken off the top before the 60-20-20 gets divvied up, I think we're just trying to figure out how do we as ATC members then manage our own internal projects for funding for this year.
And I'll give you Jason Weber napkin style math.
There we go.
So
Perfect.
you cannot hold me to these numbers. And that's why this discussion is important, because it directly impacts each core zone. And it's also why we really want to have you guys drive this from the bottom up for the budgeting purposes, rather than MWPA staff say, this is what the plan is. But I would say if everything that was on that list and some of the numbers that were talked about for the grant program, you'd probably be looking at about 2/3 of the funding that you had per core last fiscal year, this fiscal year, just because of how much more is in that core program, JPA wide core program.
So 66% of what we had last core would be available this core.
That's
if
just
all
like
these programs were approved.
The total thumbnail math, Ruben.
Yeah. Okay.
And roughly what was your total on all the stuff you presented on? Although you had a lot of TBDs, huh? So that's true.
Yeah. And was still receiving numbers up until a few minutes ago.
And that's why it's thumbnail Jason Weber on a napkin math right now.
And then and I mean, even just that's helpful. Of that, the 10% admin, can you, so that, I mean, that's obviously you guys, but that covers all legal counsel and things like that as well, right? Okay.
One component, Ann, if you don't mind me jumping in, I believe you had mentioned that part of the D-space bucket, the MWPA held back 10% for abatements.
2%.
2%. Okay, so with that said, agencies that are currently doing voluntary abatements, would they be able to then go ahead and invoice the MWPA for up to the amount of 2% for our 20% bucket?
So that's one of the things that we've been talking about with the Ops Committee and with the Ops Finance Ad Hoc is, do we really want to keep that abatement fund? When we first read the JPA language, it sounded like it was a must-have. And then when you read the language, it actually it is an option for us to do it or to not do it. And so that still is an ongoing discussion. If the member agencies decide that's not a worthwhile path to follow, we can unroll that, push that back out to the member agencies in the appropriate percentages. Or if the member agencies say they want to keep it that way, we need the language is completely silent to how it gets apportioned out to each member agency. So we'd actually need to draft the disbursement policy on how they get dispersed out. And Ruben, I think the way what you were implying would work the best, 2% proportionate to their D-space monies.
Yeah, so like, for example, I believe that there's some agencies that do have the staff and capability and the bandwidth to be able to then manage these voluntary abatements, but there may be some agencies that do not.
Right.
Where they may rely more heavily on the MWPA to say, hey, you know what, I need you to send a crew out here to abate this property versus say a larger agency or medium-sized agency that has the staff and the bandwidth to say, hey, you know what, we'll take care of that. And we'll just invoice you up to and not to exceed what that 2% fee would be.
Yeah. So it's still a question that we got to follow up on.
Okay. Any, Jordan?
This is, I don't know if you guys are taking comments or questions or maybe a little bit of both, but I think I don't want to speak for all the West Marin, the agents in the West Marin, but I think I have a pretty good pulse just because of our tight collaboration. And, when we look at kind of, even Mark, that, that kind of 2/3 number from a core perspective for the zone out here, we have, the largest land area by far with the most amount of vegetation. And I think even taking, our core budget down from 6, whatever it is, 6 mid-6s to then 4, right? In essence, right, is a pretty significant hit. And I understand the percentages, are applied across the board, but we don't pay people on percentages. We pay people with money. And so I think, with the West Marine Corps group would definitely need to take a closer look at some of these numbers. I think before and at least I would feel comfortable, just because it's going to have a pretty significant financial impact, to our already limited capacities.
I don't disagree, Jordan.
Yeah, I'd say kind of similar, and I know I recognize we have one of the biggest core pots, but that is a 33 and change % difference is substantial. And I'm just looking at like what we have tentatively, and like, well, some of that's easy. Like we're not going to put any more money towards grants because the grant program MWPA wide will be massive, and that's great. And I think some of the details, kind of building off what Chief Martin was asking about abatement. I don't know what the final decision was on how like the veg positions would be paid. I think for the chipper program, that's obviously JPA wide, but some of those ones where like, I don't think us or Novato quite needed that because we've hired those folks internally, whereas some of the smaller agencies did, and how that was going to be proportionally sorted, or if that decision had been made yet.
So if the VMS would be supporting a JPA wide position, then it would be apportioned out JPA wide. But if a VMS is focused on a zone, then it would be pulled out of that zone only. Does that answer your question, Quinn?
Yeah, it still makes it hard to figure it out, but we're still trying to sort out all those nuances. And then my other question was, I know last year we had budgeted for the countywide disaster coordinator position, but that position was vacant all last year. So my question is, do we have to budget for it this year, and can that money roll over, or is that money from last year a bit like what's happening with that? Because that was vacant all last year.
Yeah, well, go ahead, Ruben.
Okay, yeah, so the position was filled, let's see, I think in December, January, I think offer was made. And I believe, is it Elaine Wilkinson will be stepping in beginning April 15th within that role. So I believe more than half of the fiscal year money should still be available. And I believe from some of our other budgets, I believe that can be rolled over and carried over into this fiscal year to cover that cost. But we still need to budget for it, and it still needs to be, no, actually got approved last year for a 2-year position. So,
no, I'm super supportive of the position. I just, if there's ways to pull more money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Back,
so the money doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It just doesn't go into the big black hole, from my understanding. Belle?
Yeah, really, really brand new to this. And the question I have is, where do you see who's receiving the benefits, who's receiving these grants? Is there a website? Is there information that at least people on this committee or elsewhere others can have access to? So you get some sense of not just the region, but the kinds of grants that are being allocated.
Charlotte lost connection. Now she's back, and I don't know if you heard all of that question, Charlotte. But a lot of that information is sensitive information, is private and due to privacy stuff. But the Survey Monkey program that Charlotte sets up completely apportions out and will show us reports by zone, how much funding for what type of grant that has been distributed. So we have that data available for reports. And as we work on our metrics dashboard, we'll be able to show that information, but in a way that protects the citizens' privacy.
Yes.
So it's a matter of digging. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of the question, but anyone who wants to report about anything for the grants, just ask me. I can give you anything and anything the way you want it.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
When do you, Ann and Mark, when do you anticipate to have some more solid numbers on what is being proposed for potential funding mechanism or funding programs out of the core that would be then taken off the top? So that way the rest of us can then start looking at what our funding mechanism is going to be for our proposed projects for this upcoming year.
I think probably one of the next steps is to get the ad hoc subcommittees to meet again and discuss that. So we can get something calendared in the very near future, and also to discuss the grant programs and the scope. And, you know, all of these projects are scalable. So we can discuss that as an ad hoc and provide some updates there. But we're trying to really push for budget numbers for the JPA wide programs first, because they impact everyone else's budget numbers. So we feel that kind of looming our internal deadline to get those numbers finalized.
Okay. Yeah. We're very supportive of all the programs that are being proposed. For us, I think where it comes down to it is seeing actual funding at the local level to be actually get work done. Even though a lot of these programs may supplant some of the stuff that we've been doing locally. So it may be one and the same. So I think once we get to see some of those numbers, I think we'll be able to better be able to make a decision.
Yeah, I think the thing I'd add to that too is I sat on both subcommittees, right? Like I get it. I think there's a really good vision, but not just the local funding, but to some extent that local control element. And so for especially some of the bigger buckets, like the grants are specific, they make sense. They go through a local like approval process. Chipper days, same thing. Like there's a very transparent way that we can see how that locally goes back to folks. Some of the other projects are harder to see, like the public education. And we didn't even see a dollar figure with that one. And so I think some of those ones that are less transparent when it comes back to the direct local benefit, we need to either create more metrics around that or get really specific project descriptions. And like, I noticed from the fire safe board meeting as an example, like they said Ember Stop has been almost entirely donation funded. I'm super excited. It's an amazing event, but it's that confuses me from like a budgeting standpoint. And maybe they're planning for future events that are going to be bigger. So I think for those things that are less easy to track the dollars going back local, the more transparency we can get, or the more details and metrics, the better.
And Mark, would it help if for us as members of the ATC to, in not so many words, get the lead out of our backsides and submit these core projects, the sooner the better, to assist with some of your budgeting?
Yeah, absolutely. The sooner the better. And for any, well, you know, I'd like to add to that. I think Fire Safe Marin may be available to give us some more detail on what they're proposing during item 7B or 7C today.
Okay.
So hoping to hear more details there.
Perfect. Dave?
Just regarding your last comment, Ruben, last time I was on the portal, you can't add any budget numbers. That page is not available. So you can do the other pages like maps, tabs, but that one, so I don't know when that's going to change, but I'd be happy to take a stab at it if that would be so bold.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We're going to make that live very soon.
Perfect. Thank you. Before we move on, are there any members of the public that would like to comment on what we had just discussed?
At this time, is anybody in the public like to speak to the board members? Please raise your hand. I see no.
Okay, thanks, Lori. We'll bring it back to the committee. Any comments, last comments, questions for Ann or Mark regarding item 7B? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Ann. And we will get on our end and try to get some numbers to you so that way it'll make it a little easier for you to try to get some numbers back to us.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, now we're moving on to item 7C, which is work plan coordination, which is draft proposals submitted.
Great. So for this item, I think we'll be able to take a little bit of time to dig into some of the proposals that some of our member agencies would like to discuss, and maybe even dig into Fire Safe Marin's education piece. So Lori, if you have Rich Shortall or Josh Hampshire out there, it'd be great to bring them over as panelists. And
Okay,
also,
will do.
thank you. And also Stephen Peters, who'd like to discuss the CHIPPR program. So I'd also like to invite Jim Cheika to provide a little update on Marin County Parks and Open Space processes, kind of internal processes for how to coordinate with us. You know, I've been a little bit of a broken record. Just, you know, please make sure you're reaching out to Parks and Open Space on any projects that overlap those parcels. We want to make sure they're aware of our projects, and we're coordinating as appropriate. So let's see if Jim can provide a little bit of an overview and maybe some clarification on how best to work with them during this work plan development phase.
Sure. Thanks, Ann, for the handoff. That I appreciate that. And, you know, by and large, I think, you know, our collaboration with all the different fire agencies has been going really well. But yeah, I mean, right now we are in the process of developing a draft timeline to present to our Parks and Open Space Commission that will also push out to all of our supporting fire agencies so that we can all get on the same page with how we as land managers and similar to the process of MWPA, develop our own work plan for things that we would do and have done over the last 10 years through our own vegetation management program and funded by Measure A and the general fund. But, you know, in short, until now, you know, we've been kind of working in parallel with MWPA, pretty much mirroring, you know, the deadlines that were set forth by MWPA in terms of having project proposals submitted by March 31st. So, you know, working back from that date, it's been kind of mixed experiences with different agencies about what it means to kind of engage and what sort of levels of detail that we would like to have. I think, you know, in a general sense, like, you know, reaching out to us early, you know, months in advance of the deadline is really helpful. And what that all that really needs to mean is like a phone call or an email to me personally. Hey, we're thinking about this particular region of your open space. We'd like to discuss, you know, some defensible space, or we'd like to discuss invasive species in this area. What are your thoughts about partnering on a project for the Corps? That could be, you know, just pretty much a casual conversation in January, so that over the next couple of months leading up to March 31st, we're on the same page with the basics of the concept proposal, which lands are going to be touched, what's the general scope of work, what are the basic roles and responsibilities of our agencies, and what support might the fire partner be able to lend in that project. And then after the 31st, you know, that's when we kind of roll up our sleeves and we really figure out a lot more details in terms of, you know, the precise scopes of work and maybe even contractor level details and all of our compliance and CEQA needs, like it was outlined today. So, you know, one of our commitments too is that we really work with a lot of our stakeholders. It's really shared stakeholders, you know, folks that you're all engaging with too. And that's folks from the environmental community, different HOAs and other neighbors of ours. So it's really helpful if we get, you know, get those conversations starting early so that we can have all of those folks engaged and providing some really high level feedback in advance of the March 31st deadline. So that's kind of a general overview of what we'd like to see. I think we're starting to see a couple of like real last minute submissions of, you know, things that we hadn't really talked about before, and we're doing our best to accommodate those because we understand those are priorities to some of our partners. But it's also a tough position to being this close to the deadline at this point. So I guess to just say, yeah, this is absolutely like the kind of last call for concept proposals at this point for our agency. And then once we develop a timeline for the next fiscal year projects, we'll be sure to work through the ATC and work together on making sure that we're streamlining some key dates for when we want to have these different kinds of conversations.
Thanks so much, Jim. I'm happy to defer my next talking points for questions for Jim, but I can also move on to my to a couple of other points I want to make before I open it up.
Oh, one other bit, Anne, is I think, you know, in terms of some of the proposed improvements to the web portal and kind of documentation about like the level of collaboration and things with the different land managers, I think that is still evolving. So that I think those improvements are really going to help. Once folks have this experience this year going through and seeing what those fields look like in terms of the needs for communicating what the collaboration has looked like to that point, that'll, I think, help people be better prepared for next year too. But I think there's still some additions if I'm not wrong. I obviously don't have access to the portal, but I think there's some improvements still that need to be made in that area.
Yeah, thank you so much for that segue, actually. Changes to the web portal. We do have some additional changes that we're making to the web portal, and we're open to more suggestions as problems arise and suggestions come up. We're happy to hear your thoughts. Of course, as we dig into the web portal and submit proposals, we're finding ways to tweak it and make it easier for some of those projects out there. So for example, we added a prompt and a text box for if you're just proposing a new staff position to be funded by MWPA, you can enter the title of that position and a description of that position, and you don't have to answer a ton of other questions that aren't relevant to that. And that's true for equipment as well. We're including, you know, if you choose equipment as what you're looking for funding for, you can describe what that equipment is and not go, that's a more tailored way of answering. You don't have to answer a whole bunch of questions that, that are not relevant for you. And then, you know, please continue to let us know, either Josh, Hampshire, or myself, what other suggestions you have, or if things aren't working for you, we're happy to get your ideas and work with our developer to continue modifying and customizing for all of our member agencies. I see Greg.
Hey, Ann, is the web portal, has that gone live yet? In our member agencies using that for submission of, say, like 23 projects?
Yeah, the web portal went live in February because of, so we started working with our legal counsel on how to build it to be Brown Act compliant, etc. It's got some limitations, so it's not actually open for our non-voting ATC members to use. And there's some limitations in terms of viewing until proposals become public, and then they can be viewed by anybody. But so yes, it's live and it's getting used, and member agencies have been uploading projects as we go for the last month or so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So if there are no questions about what I just presented on, I want to invite some other folks to discuss some of their proposals. As I mentioned in February, I wanted to put some time on the agenda to just discuss what we're proposing as member agencies. There are advantages to that, to publicizing or making public what your proposals are in terms of Brown Act compliance and collaboration and all of that, being part of a Brown Act committee here. So I thought we'd start off with a couple of folks here who have generously offered to share some of their ideas. We've got Stephen Peters here to talk about the CHIPPR program, and we've got Rich Shortall and Josh Hampshire, who's been helping Fire Safe Marin quite a bit, to discuss the education component today. And then anybody else who has proposals you'd like to share, especially if you have, well, we can get into that later. That would be great. It would be a really good time to start discussing some of the proposals you're planning on for fiscal year 22-23. Stephen, do you mind sharing some of your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone, good to be here. So I'll be brief as of now. So for those of you who don't know, the CHIPPR program is a JPA-wide curbside vegetation pickup and removal service. Every community, incorporated and unincorporated, are within the JPA are eligible to participate. As of right now, we're in the process of submitting the proposal for it. Our budget numbers are taking a little longer because we've adjusted our RFP to no longer have a 4-day week work expectation with our contractors. We're hoping that's a cost-saving measure, but it does mean that we have to wait to see how reservations shake out over the next month to be able to accurately forecast that. As of now, we opened our registration yesterday at 9 a.m. and we already have roughly 300 reservations. We're looking to increase on our over 3,000 person pickup list of last year. And yeah, if anyone has any questions on it, I'd be happy to answer.
Stephen, real quick, the switch away from like the guaranteed 4 days, does that remove the extra project component?
No, it does not. We're in the process of figuring out how that's going to fit in there, but we are not cutting that out.
Great. If there aren't any more questions for Stephen, thank you so much, Stephen. Really appreciate you taking time out to chat with us today. Rich and Josh, do you want to discuss some of the education proposals?
Sure. Can I do a share screen, please? Hold on one second. So let's see. Okay, everybody see that? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so real quickly, so we tried to break down the budget with a little more detail this year, but for those of you who have worked with us know that we have a very small staff that works across all of our different projects. So it's not like a field management project where it's this many people for X number of hours on a single project necessarily. So we all participate in all the different things we're doing. I tried to think of the sort of the percentage of time we put on things to give a little better sense of where things go, but I think you get the idea. And then at the operations committee meeting, there was a strong request for more public education. So we're adding, besides our base education programming, 2 new initiatives this year: bilingual outreach and the ADAPT campaign, which I'll get into. So real quickly, this is the same request essentially as we put in last year, virtually the same amount. It's the same types of things you're used to seeing where we support Firewise USA. We are changing how we're doing some of our video outreach. We started off with webinars. People got tired of those. We did the Wildfire Watch TV show, which I personally liked a lot, but we think what we need to do is focus on more of the shorter videos. We're going to keep a lot of the things that you saw on Wildfire Watch, like do-it-yourself series, Mythbusters, etc., because those are extremely popular and people are watching those. Firebeat's important with Mark Brown. Then occasionally a feature video on a bigger subject, and then animated shorts, again, get a lot of viewership and are really popular. So we're just basically keeping things shorter, but a lot of the same things that were very popular. We'll do the workshops again. The purpose of the workshops is to allow each of the zones to showcase what they have done over the year. That's why they come later in the year, an opportunity for the public to ask questions and get back to them. And then that all gets put together into a sort of a highlight reel for MWPA use to focus on all the activity during the year. We have a large cache of written materials, which people access all the time, whether it be the public or the folks who are doing the home evaluations and so forth. So we need to keep that going, and we're developing new materials for that. Website is 200,000 visitors a year, is extremely popular. Takes time to keep that up to date. It's not a static type of thing. Social media outreach, that's been one of the biggest changes this year. If you've been following us on Instagram, Twitter, and so forth, you'll see a lot more outreach. The numbers are going up real fast. I'm actually surprised at how many people are viewing it, and they're spending a lot of time looking at it. So it's a way of reaching a different segment of the population than we did in the past. We had really good results with Marin schools this year, created more programming for 5th grade. We want to move into more work with high schools. There's a couple of them working for, and we think there's a lot of opportunity there. We'll continue to support the DSpace program. And as you probably know, when you get your home evaluation form, it links directly with information on FireSafe Marin website, which tells you how to do the different components of what the work is. We're actually going to add quite a bit to that so that there's more information there. And then professional training, we work with a lot of different organizations, whether it be Northern California landscapers or partner agencies like Marinsil. There's a long laundry list with them. It's back and forth between the two of us, but we support them with materials and programming, and then they support by helping us get our word out. So that's our base fund. It's pretty much the same as last year, just a little different approach on some of it. We have done a lot of bilingual programming. We'd like to do more. There's a real interest in that. So we'd like to add another 50,000. This is a new initiative to do more of that. We're kind of tapped out on how much we can do right now. So that's best served if we want to go in that direction. And then the last one is the ADAPT campaign. You've all seen that. We've spoken quite a bit about this, but in order for this campaign to be successful, you basically need to see it everywhere. So the next steps is really to keep the campaign fresh. And that needs more photographs and content and so forth, but we need to get it in other places. We need to see it on street banners. We need to see it in more media than just the IJ, for example. I could go into a long list of this, but banners, storefront posters, etc. If you want this all over the place, that would be a way to expand the band campaign for next year. And that's basically our submission. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thanks, Rich. Do we have any questions for Rich regarding what FireSafe Marin has been doing and proposing?
That breakdown's really helpful. Thank you, Rich.
No, thank you, Rich. I think FireSafe Marin has definitely stepped up its game in the pub ed realm. And I know, at least speaking on our side as the fire agencies, we have definitely leaned heavily on you and what you provide and the material that is being pushed out there. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rich. Really appreciate that. Any other questions before we open it up to others? Great. Well, Rich and Josh, thank you for taking time out and doing that and pulling that presentation together. I wanted to provide some space for other member agencies to discuss proposals, even at the high level for the next fiscal year. If you're interested, if you're comfortable sharing some of those ideas, I would just encourage you, if you have a vegetation management project that overlaps a land management agency's jurisdiction and you haven't worked with that partner yet, to maybe hold off on sharing those until a little further along in the planning process. But any other projects that you'd like to share? I think maybe Novato, Mike Swayze was interested in sharing a project. If we can move him over.
Okay.
I just attempted to move him over as a panelist. So Mike, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you have any proposals you'd like to discuss today, that would be great. And now would be the time.
Great, thank you. This is more in the category of informal presentation. I have to follow Rich, so I just have that disclaimer. So if I could share my screen, I could have a little bit of audio visual here.
Are you able to share?
I'm not seeing the button.
You should be okay, Mike. See if
Okay,
that'll
I see
work.
it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, okay, the first is what I'm going to call Novato bread and butter. What's kind of unique to Novato is there's tons of city-owned open space parcels that are kind of embedded in the community. And we've the first year we launched a couple projects. This year we've launched a couple more. We're doing planning work for a number of others that we'll bring to the board for approval this fiscal year, but we're planning on budgeting a lot of first fuel break work in Novato open space parcels and also maintenance follow-up. So just kind of zoom in, you got to get to see that there's these hilltop open space parcels that are embedded in the community. There are quite a number of them, and they do have significant fuel issues. So we're developing kind of fuel breaks along the perimeter of the community in these various open space parcels. That's one. Let's see if I can get to my other one here. And another project I'd like to share is a 2-acre eucalyptus removal. I read in the paper that there was a project in Santa Rosa where they were removing eucalyptus as a fire hazard, and it was next to a cemetery. So here we are, downtown Novato, Atherton Road. I'm going to zoom in here. We have a project next to a cemetery, Valley Memorial Park Cemetery. And it's this cemetery plot is adjacent to this developed community, and all of this is surrounded by Rush Creek Preserve. The project we're looking at is a 2-acre removal of very tall eucalyptus with an understory of eucalyptus saplings and brush, and big fire hazard potential there, immediately adjacent to the community. So we're going to propose a little project development proposal and CEQA compliance. And since the cost of removing large eucalyptus is very high, we're looking at implementing this possibly over a number of years to spread that out. But I don't have the numbers to share on costs yet. But I know a lot of the other partner agencies have eucalyptus stands they're interested in addressing. So I think in this case, we're the guinea pig. Another effort that we've done a lot of work this year that will continue in the following years is doing work along evacuation routes. We're definitely going to decrease the amount of work, but there's still a fair amount yet to do. So that'll be one of our additional proposals. And that is all I've got.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was really helpful. San Rafael, do you have some projects that you'd like to share, or would you like to hold off?
No, I can kind of briefly talk through it. I know Kate's in the other world. If you want to move her over, she can certainly dive into some more details. Not unsimilar, honestly, to a lot of the similar stuff Mike's working on, some of those pockets of open space just in the middle of residential areas. Some eucalyptus kind of thinning and understory clearing, grazing, which will be expanding. And I anticipate that being one of those things that just keeps going up as we get more and more understory cleared and use great goats to maintain it over the years. Looking at a couple like specific invasive and broom kind of targeted removal projects where we're really gonna try to get that initial work started and move through that. I think the one I'm pretty excited about that we transitioned from moving away from creating like a destination demonstration garden to trying to meet people where they're at with the plants and the educational material. So we'll be doing some drought and fire tolerant planting throughout the city where we know we have good pedestrian traffic and people already frequent, and then adding kind of, think like nature boardwalk signs that will explain kind of what's in that area. So just like as someone's there and watching their kid on a pogo stick or whatever, they can kind of read that, get informed. And that'll help us do some of the restoration work where we've removed a lot of the plants, but do it in a really educational way. And then really excited to partner with Fire Safe Marin to create a version of the recycled water irrigation sign that's fire adapted planting that we can start kind of putting everywhere that we're putting that fire adapted planting in, and it'll hopefully match the ADAPT campaign. So again, kind of that branding. Kate, do you want to dive into any more of the specifics on any of those sites?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm also pretty excited about the public education approach that we're taking this coming year. For the most part, our vegetation management is carryovers of projects that we proposed last year. So continuing initial treatment on areas we didn't get to, or going back for more immediate maintenance where needed. But with the amount of rain we had, I'm not anticipating a whole lot of that. So that includes our fire roads, our goats in the kind of the same areas. Continuing on San Rafael open space, really similar approach to what Mike has throughout the city. And evacuation routes. Now that we've done our initial pass, informed by our suppression staff, we're going to go fill in any holes or any other areas that have come up over the last year. And so that's kind of the broad overview, a couple new ideas and a lot of carryover.
Thank
Anyone
you
has
so
any
much.
questions on that?
Questions for Kate and Quinn? Great. Any other proposals anyone would like to share? We're getting a little close to 4 o'clock, but we still have a couple minutes. All right, that might be it for this item. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out and sharing your draft proposals. We appreciate
Yes,
it.
thank you, everyone. It was very exciting to look forward to. Lori, can we check to see if there's any members of the public that would like to comment on item 7C?
Sure. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak on the work plan coordination item? Please raise your hand. I see none at this time. Thank you.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the committee. Any final comments or questions regarding item 7C from the public? Jim?
Yeah, no, I just want to take the opportunity to thank Mike Swayze and the Nevada Fire Department for the eucalyptus removal project. Although it's not, on parks and open space lands, it is adjacent to that, and it's directly adjacent to the Rush Creek Lighting and Landscape District community, which is a special dependent district that we as Marin County Parks help support, in terms of their budgeting and use of their landscape funds. And this has been an area that's been of great concern to residents who live along that road, and kind of a history of some issues with the eucalyptus. So yeah, thanks Mike, and thanks Lynn for your leadership on helping moving that forward.
Awesome. Another great example of partnership and collaboration with our neighboring agencies, which is good. which is, I think, what the entire intent of MWPA was, and which is actually nice to see happening in such a short period of time. With that, it takes us to item number 8, committee members' requests regarding future agenda items. It's an opportunity for any members of the committee to go ahead and request items that you'd like to see on the next ATC meeting. One thing that I have for both Mark and Ann is, I believe, since we're still doing meetings via Zoom, and per the Brown Act, I believe we've got to bring back the approval of being able to continue to meet via Zoom monthly. And I believe if we may have to bring that for approval at the next meeting.
We have that covered, and we do that monthly at our board of directors meeting too,
Okay.
and it includes all of our subcommittees.
Oh, perfect. Outstanding. Then we don't have to worry about it.
Yep. Assembly Bill 361, once a month. Whatever you like it or not.
I know, one would have thought.
And I think Jim may have a comment.
Jim?
Yeah, is it okay if I, as a non-voting member, propose something for the agenda here?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. No, as I mentioned in my comments earlier about the timeline and the development of concept proposals for, at least for Parks and Open Space, we're going to be presenting this draft timeline to our Parks and Open Space Commission later this week. And so it might be helpful to then bring that timeline back to this group for the April 6th ATC. And if that's too soon, another maybe helpful addition would be the input of the other land managers who serve on this group too. So perhaps there's a way for each of the land managers to collaborate and present our timelines and kind of like our picture for, how optimally we would like to engage with each of the fire partners and how that syncs up with the deadline for submittals through MWPA.
In my opinion, I think April 6th will probably be a good meeting because it kind of sets the ground rule for all of the member agencies to then start making our own proposals. Comments, recommendations, Mark or Ann? Does that work for you guys on the April 6th?
Yeah, absolutely. And, whatever we learn from you and our other land management partners in this committee, we can incorporate that into our process for next time around and make sure that those deadlines that you guys have internally are part of our process as well. And so I think we'll just, adapt as we go, and we'll incorporate that in new information. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks, Jim. Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure that at the next meeting, there's a chance to discuss the review of the ecologically sound practices guidelines that have been under review. And I know MWPA is working on it, but I just want to be sure that there will be a discussion at April 6th. Is that okay, Ann?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
Quinn?
Maybe less of a request for the next meeting and maybe before, but if that 10% environmental overall cost, maybe some clarification on how we should then either budget or plan for planning projects when the bulk majority of the planning project budget would have been environmental. So if we should still just kind of figuring out what that looks like, because that'll help us moving forward. Does that make sense? I don't feel like I made sense on that question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's something that we've been thinking about as well, because a lot of these, a larger shaded fuel break that's planning and environmental compliance, that doesn't, we're thinking that can be in its own bucket.
Okay. Yeah. So clear direction on that would be super helpful. And then, maybe again, less about maybe the next agenda, but sorry, there's a lot of noises happening in my office right now. If we can, when you are doing updates in the portal, if there's a way to PDF them and send them out or something, because I don't know how other folks are doing this, but I have my team building out the answers, but they don't have access to the portal. And so then I review them and put them in, but then if there's new questions, I kind of end up. So if there's a way to maybe provide the updated or the final version of the portal, just so we can get those drafts in there as completely as possible for you as soon as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have the PDF form that was developed for the portal? I think there are a couple of pieces of
think
it that
we
are
were
not
working off an-
included,
I
but
think- Yeah, I think we were working off an old one, so I don't, I know there's gonna be kind of continuous changes, but I don't know how, when you add something new to, I don't know how that goes back to the old projects, and so I just want to make sure we get all the information folks need in there.
yeah, we have a process for that. It's called Josh Hampshire.
I was just about to say, I'll make the updates to the forum and send that out soon.
Awesome, thanks, Josh.
Awesome, thanks, Josh. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Want to thank everyone for being here. Just a reminder, our next meeting is April 6th at 10 a.m. And can I have a motion to adjourn? Okay, Quinn, and second by Larry Pissarro. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and thank you for participating. We'll see you guys.
Thank you.